People shaped by the 1960s tend to respond to pressure in a way that quietly stands apart. You can see it in how they move through crisis. They don't rush, they don't unravel, they absorb pressure and keep going. It's not stubbornness, and it's not nostalgia. The 1960s didn't just influence a generation, they built a specific psychological structure, one that balanced danger with normal life, hope with loss, and freedom with responsibility. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why people from that decade tend to remain composed when everything feels unstable. Let's start with something most people overlook. Picture yourself as a small child in a classroom. A sound interrupts the day. The teacher's voice changes. You slide beneath your desk and cover your head. You don't fully understand nuclear war, but you understand enough. You know adults are worried. You know the desk won't really protect you. And you know the world your parents built isn't guaranteed to last. What's fascinating is what this didn't create. It didn't create paralysis. Children from the 1960s learned to live with unresolved threat. The possibility of disaster existed, and life continued anyway. Homework still mattered. Dinner still came. Tomorrow still required preparation. They learned early how to function without certainty. That ability followed them into adulthood. When you grow up practicing for catastrophe, everyday problems lose their power. Compared to total collapse, most stresses feel manageable. This generation developed an internal filter, what deserves energy and what doesn't. Not because they read about it, because they lived it. Now consider how quickly the world changed around them. Picture a Sunday evening in February 1964. You're sitting in a living room when the Beatles appear on The Ed Sullivan Show. The sound feels unfamiliar. The reaction is explosive. Parents look uneasy. But something clicks for you. Without anyone explaining it, you witness proof that culture can flip overnight. For people growing up in the 1960s, this became a quiet expectation. What feels permanent probably isn't. That's why they aren't threatened by disruption later in life. They've already watched entire norms dissolve and reform. But this sense of possibility didn't exist in isolation. It collided with loss. They watched national figures disappear, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, within a few short years. Hope arrived, and then it was taken away. This didn't turn them cynical. It made them psychologically layered. They learned that progress is real, but fragile. That belief without realism doesn't survive long. Now bring it closer to childhood again. Picture yourself being handed real money, coins with weight, bills that disappear when you spend them. You don't learn about consequences, you feel them. Spend it, and it's gone. Save it, and it grows. Children of the 1960s developed an intuitive understanding of limits because nothing was abstract. Independence extended beyond money. You walked to school alone. You navigated neighborhoods without supervision. You learned which streets felt wrong, which adults felt safe. Their brains were trained to observe environments quietly and constantly. And when pain happened, because it did, it wasn't dramatized. You fell. You scraped your knees. You got hurt. And the response was simple. You're fine. Not dismissal. Calibration. They learned the difference between discomfort and danger. That's why people from this era don't assume pain means something is broken. They were also trusted with real tools, things that could fail, or break, or cause harm. Responsibility came before safety disclaimers. This created adults who aren't intimidated by complexity. They assume problems can be understood. Waiting shaped them too. You waited for songs on the radio, for movies to return to, theaters. For the next episode a full week later. Desire stretched over time. This built patience, not as a virtue but as a baseline. That's why delays don't feel threatening to them. Socially, much of their childhood was unsupervised. Conflicts were resolved internally. Rules were negotiated. They learned to read people quickly, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Then came July 20th, 1969. You're watching a grainy screen as a human steps onto the moon. Limits collapse in real time. For children of the 1960s, this moment planted a deep belief. What seems impossible might simply be misunderstood. But even that triumph existed alongside darker images. Evening news showed the Vietnam War. Real violence, real consequences. They learned early that authority can be wrong. So trust became selective. They respected competence, not titles. Boredom played its role too. No endless content, no constant stimulation. Empty time forced imagination to activate, which is why silence doesn't unsettle them. And when failure came, it wasn't softened. You lost. You weren't chosen. And then life moved on. They learned something essential. Disappointment is survivable. So when you notice the calm of people who grew up in the 1960s, understand this. They were shaped by reality, not protection. By responsibility, not reassurance. They learned early that the world is uncertain and livable. That hope and loss can coexist. That strength doesn't announce itself, it stabilizes. That's the psychology of people who grew up in the 1960s. And it's something the modern world rarely builds anymore. What's one habit or mindset from your childhood that you still rely on today? Let us know in the comments below.